Let's get going.
Oh, Tony.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. Let's start with some housekeeping and administrative issues. First of all, want to welcome new members. Tony Malone, sitting over in the corner, the CTO of Verizon. Tony, we're glad you're here. Charlie Vogt, the CEO of GenBand, I don't see around here, but he'll be joining us. And Tom, Tom, where are you hiding?
Over here, Tom.
There you are. He has a different jersey on than he has in previous times. He was traded for 2 minor league draft players, though.
Minor league. And a future pick.
But Tom is now representing the Vaughn Coalition, and Tom, we're glad that you can stay with us wearing your new outfit. And then lastly, John Chapin there's John, and John is joining us as also wearing a new jersey as a subject matter expert with some interesting things, it sounds like, happening in his life. But we won't go into them here. I'd like to visit with you a little bit about the kind of comments the chairman just made, and think out loud about future directions of this group. It's been a year now since just short of a year since we first met. Our December meeting will be 13 months. And we've got a whole heck of a lot of things that this group and the working groups have been accomplishing. One of the things, going back to the chairman's comments, though, is that we want to make sure that collectively we continually revisit what our ideas are and what our recommendations and suggestions might be. You all have done yeoman's work in dealing with the groups that fell out of the 4 broad areas you all identified at our first meeting. I'd now like to suggest that when we come back at the December meeting, that each group present up to 5 recommendations in succinct, actionable steps. And let me repeat, succinct, actionable. A lot of our recommendations to this point have been that we need to get these parties together, we need to have a workshop on this, we need to do this. All worthwhile suggestions. Those workshops will be over by the time that we meet in December. And it is time to take the collective effort that you all have been engaged in for the last year, pull it into up to 5 succinct recommendations for actionable steps for each group, and present those to this body in December for us to forward to the chairman. Then, at that same meeting, and I hope informally amongst ourselves, and I solicit your input direct to me in the process in the interim, that we will also have a discussion amongst this entire group about a 2012 agenda and the evolution of the issues we've been talking about, the kinds of things that we should take up here. I think I just heard the chairman make a suggestion that maybe dealing with E-rate as it relates to things would be a worthwhile undertaking. Obviously, that's been outside of the purview of what we've been looking at thus far. What are other kinds of issues where we can have similar, succinct, actionable recommendations? And the goal then would be to identify those in our December 20 meeting and put together a program that we would kick off in our first quarter 2012 meeting. Any questions about that or thoughts on that kind of an agenda? All right, we'll be moving down that course. I mean, I seriously, please solicit your suggestions. We all have each other's emails. Please share them with the group, share them with me, however you want to do it. But let's see if we can put together between now and the December meeting a list of things that we don't just have to sit here at the December meeting and look at each other and say, gee, what do you think we ought to be doing? So with that being said, I also want to, as the chairman did, call out the staff, because you all are working real hard in your working groups, and the staff has a tax steering group that not only works with your working group, but also tries and coordinate things in the agency. And so I would be remiss if we didn't say a big thank you to Chris Lewis and Julie Knapp and Walter Johnston and Lisa Gelb and Doug Sicker, the absent Doug Sicker, Mike McKenzie, Donna Schulder, and John Leibowitz, who was also the absent. Did I say Donna? Dina. Jesus, Dina. Sorry. I knew that didn't sound right. But thank you all for all the work that you're doing. This is for everybody, whether it be the members of this committee or the members of the FCC staff. You have day jobs, and this is add-on work, and so thank you to the staff as well as to the members of the committee. Okay, so let's get on with today's agenda. As I said, we have a jam-packed agenda. We're going to lead with Adam and the most jammed of all, and I would hope that we could try and enforce a discipline amongst ourselves of about 20 minutes for presentation and then roughly 20 minutes for discussion amongst the group, so that we can get through all of the topics. We put Adam first because you've all seen the PowerPoint, and I don't, maybe it's the Evelyn Wood speed talking course that he's going to have here. But Adam, it's oh, you know, I forgot one thing. I've got to use the clicker because I need to tee up. The staff put together this report on. Did they come up on the? It's on here. I can read it real well here, folks. There we go. Okay, great. The staff put together a box score on where we are on the various recommendations thus far. That these are 8 recommendations on which the commission has taken action. I won't read them to you. Some of them themselves, for instance, the executive order on siting in infrastructure, the process has begun. The deliverable has not been delivered, but it deserves a check in the box that it's underway. So here are the 8 recommendations that they've acted on, and then 4 other recommendations that have steps leading up to further activity. And then this is the list of the recommendations that are involved in ongoing proceedings or just ended proceedings or are awaiting some other input from other sources. Are there any of these that anybody wants to comment on or ask questions about to the appropriate member of the staff? If not, I will start passing this around because we don't throw the clicker. Okay? You will remember at our last meeting, or meeting before last, that we were very disrespectful of the clicker. So Adam, it's you. It's over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So let me do the following. So this is the Critical Legacy Transition Working Group. And during the agenda, what I'm going to do is spend a couple of minutes on progress since the June meeting. We have a new work item we'll be reporting on, and that's the role of wireless in the critical transition. I think last time we were asked, what does sunsetting the PSTN mean? So I'll spend some time on that, and then just a little bit of time on feedback and some other activity that's going on. Okay? Let's see.
First one.
Which one is forward next? Okay, so let's do the following. We have had a fairly active group. Those are the names of the folks on the group. I have to say, they've all worked very diligently. We've had at least one phone call a week, if not more. And since the last June meeting, we've actually continued to work on 6 items that we had identified. The first of those was new metrics for broadband quality. I think there was already a recommendation around that. The second is sizing the transition, and that's specifically looking at stranded assets in operators' hands. The third is stranded assets in users' hands, national competitiveness, regulations, standards and common practices, what would have to change in that world, and lastly, economic and regulatory impact. All those groups have continued to work. We have added a 7th one, which is the role of wireless in the transition. And as I said previously, we're going to be reporting the results from that. If I were to look at what we've been doing since the last meeting, we've had a number of briefings to the group. We found a cross-cutting theme in any kind of transition is the continuation of services for emergency response and law enforcement. And in looking at that, we've had Jeff Goldthorpe from the Public Safety and Homeland Bureau come and give us a talk on what he thought were unresolved issues. We also had Walter Johnson do a fairly in-depth briefing on measuring broadband in America, so we understand what the status is of that. And then lastly, we had Mark Leisner from Cisco CTO office give us a presentation on E911, and in particular what's happening in international standards bodies related to that. Okay. So what I would like to do is really concentrate on 2 items. One is the role of wireless in the PSTN transition, and the second is the definition of what sunsetting is. So without much ado, what I'd like to do is actually pass the pointer to Russ Gurek, who's going to report for us for the wireless subgroup that we have in our we've had from our deliberations.
Either that or you can just change the slide. Thank you. So I want to cover what we've done on wireless over the last 3 months. And one quick correction to Adam's statement. We've had more than just a phone call a week, and I want to call that out because most of us didn't, I don't think any of us really used the PSTN on those meetings. We actually had web meetings, not phone calls. So just want to clarify that because it goes towards the proposal.
That's a critical transition that you have made.
Thank you. So, of course, everyone's aware our proposal was to sunset the PSTN, the regulated PSTN, by 2018. And what we're looking at are what the various replacement technologies are. One of them, specifically on this group, is wireless. And a little bit of a change in terminology from what you see on the slide. It's not so much as a replacement move, maybe as one of the alternatives or competitive alternatives. And around that is what issues need to be resolved if we move towards or past the PSTN in terms of E911, location capabilities, universal service, accessibility. These are all the major issues that the PSTN currently handles, in addition to rural wireless deployment economics, because one of the big issues, of course, is getting broadband and service out to the rural areas around universal services. Another area that we had questions on was spectrum availability. I know the FCC is getting a lot of questions on this and doing some studies. White spaces in particular, and spectrum efficiency. So some of the questions in summarization, it really is wireless a viable alternative, and what needs to be done to maybe fill in some of the gaps around emergency services or accessibility. And then the other question is, based on that, how can we incent or accelerate the transition away from the PSTN? And then what needs to be done, and we talk about social services and social needs. This is what has been handled by the PSTN for the past 100 years, really, is some of the social needs and goals that are met by the PSTN today. So some quick observations, and these will be supported on the next couple slides. Oh, yeah, I guess I should go to the next slide. Okay, there's a quick view graph of what we just talked about. Okay, some of the observations. As many of you are probably aware, or if you've got kids, the transition is already well underway from what we'll call PSTN to, and I hate to confuse landline with PSTN. Landline can also be a broadband type capable service. So PSTN is really the phone side of that, or the voice side of that. But the wireless substitution, 30% basically by the end of last year for wireless only. Much of the population views it as a very viable replacement technology, or already looking at moving to that type of capability. It's also a bit tied to age demographics, as I mentioned, and there is good support already in terms of location capability for E911 services, and we'll get into that probably in these next few months as we dig deeper on that. Also, wireless has an attractive deployment cost, or CapEx, compared to a traditional wireline service. Now, the OpEx we did not look into as deeply. And there's much greater capability, obviously, the mobility piece with wireless. Okay. So a couple quick view graphs. If you take a look here, you can see a steady trend. I wouldn't say it's it's starting to move higher, but it's a very steady trend as the transition from wireless or from wireline. So it's already starting to happen. And the next slide, taking a look at the demographics based on age. And I don't think this is really a surprise to anybody. Most of the younger demographic only knows wireless. And as they move on to college, although that's a specific sort of area, or as they move out of the house, they kind of just stick with a wireless type capability there. The one that was a little surprising was the 55 to 65. Of course, there is a difference between somewhat likely and very likely there. Okay, so as far as the difference in terms of the OpEx or deployment costs, wireless, it's very clear where you have wide open spaces, the cost to deploy wireline gets very expensive. And I think you can see this from this map, as most of everything sort of west of the Mississippi gets to be fairly open spaces and gets to be rather expensive. So wireless has a much better opportunity there. It may be a little difficult to read, but there are some dollar figures there in terms of what the differences are. And if you look at the more populated areas, it's kind of a wash, really. And then taking a look, and this was a rather interesting slide we wanted to put up, because the difference between rural and urban, there's really not a great difference in terms of willingness to move away from the PSTN to a wireless type technology. So some of the key findings, I think we've already talked about a few of these. Transition from wireline to wireless, or from PSTN to wireless, is already happening. The deployment of wireless may have significant cost differences within the United States. Wireless service is being replaced with multiple technologies today, or universal service is being replaced with multiple technologies. Certain social objectives remain, and new ones uniquely served by wireless, especially around mobility and emerging. So there are some other opportunities with wireless that we can look at. For instance, in terms of emergency services, we've had, here in DC there was a quake. We've had a storm that went up the East Coast here a few weeks ago. And wireless also gives you ability to tweet, to text messages, potentially to emergency services, and that has happened to some degree. The real question is, how do we get public service emergency systems to accept those? And then the final recommendations that we're making, at least at this point in time, is we understand the FCC is already reviewing the Universal Service Fund, but we'd like to have them keep in mind or have a focus on the sunset capability or the sunset issue of the wireline PSTN within the 2018 and what impact that would require to the Universal Service Fund. And that's really around rural as well as wireless funding. Review of potential preemption of non-emergency services to support emergency calls. And this is when a network's at capacity. This is not in existence today. There's certain government capabilities like GETS and WPS that allow this on other networks. But what we're looking at is if there is an overcapacity situation on the wireless, and this needs more study, but to take a look at the opportunity to preempt other regular service for emergency calls to get through. And the FCC to play a larger role in harmonizing the global standards and common reference systems. This is no longer just a U.S. issue when you start to move towards IP networks. There's issues that run across, you could be subscribing to a voice service that's outside the U.S. How do you put regulations on that particular type service if it's located outside the United States? However, there is opportunity for the FCC to have a bigger role in terms of influencing the global standards. Any government-funded network builds for the replacement of PSTN should be both IPv6 capable, look at the accessibility requirements, as well as some of the other social goals that are met by the PSTN today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Adam, or did you want to take questions in between, Adam?
Why don't you take questions at this point?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, Brian. Brian, then we'll go to, everybody, let's do the same thing as we've done traditionally and put these up, and I'll then call you. Brian.
Thank you. Brian Daly, AT&T. With regard to the preemption, just one clarification on WPS. That is a priority service and not a preemption service today. We don't do any preemption on the networks today, so that call would be put into a queue that would then get the next available channel. The whole issue of preemption obviously brings in a lot of other issues and questions, including how do you know what's an emergency call versus a non-emergency call. It's not necessarily just 911 dialing, for example. So just wanted to point out that there are many issues to study under that one particular item. Thank you.
It's a good clarification, by the way, and whether the real point is probably to look at both the options of priority and or preemption. I understand there's probably quite a few issues if there's SLAs around preemption, and you have a good point too on what's an emergency.
So are you responding to what Brian said? I don't want to.
No, I have a.
I don't want to preempt Kevin. Are you okay?
Well, mine is not an emergency.
Well, we're not going to preempt you.
I just wanted to get in the queue. Yeah. I don't know if this is a question actually for wireless or for the more general question of PSTN, but a lot of the discussion, and I mean wireless brings it into sharp focus for me, of PSTN sunsetting and replacement, tends to identify communication to the individual. Wireless certainly is that. I mean, PSTN has its other social property, relevant certainly to business, but also relevant, I think, to people at times, which is it's actually communication to a location, right? When you call a phone number, you're not calling an individual person, you're calling a house or or a business. And I just wondered, between the wireless discussion and the more general PSTN discussion, whether you guys had kind of thought through communication that's more location-based, whether it's business location or home location, and how that social characteristic interacts with this transition that I think we do see happening to wireless.
Russ, you want to try that?
So I'm not sure I fully understand your question or comments there. We did look into the location issue.
No, I'm not talking about the E911 part of location.
Right.
When you make a phone call to a cell phone, you're calling a person. When you make a phone call to a classical landline phone number, you're calling not a person. You may think you're calling a person, you're not. You're calling a place, a house. Now, sometimes it makes no difference. But sometimes what you actually mean is, I want to call somebody at that house. That's particularly the case for businesses, right? When I call a business, I don't care which clerk is on duty. I'm calling the business. So these two, the distinction only occurs when you start to think about some of these replacement technologies. And I'm simply wondering whether the group has thought through at all the way in which that social differentiation is going to play out as we pull the PSTN out and replace it with some other things. Because it's not something that comes to mind right away, but it's actually a difference in how communication works. I mean, if you talk to like the anthropologist type folks, the ethnographic people.
It's a good point, and to be honest, we have not discussed that
Maybe
at
you
this
wanna
point,
put it
but
in-
we'll take that, we'll take that on.
And thank you for queuing that up.
Then cue it up, that's
That was
fine.
good.
Okay.
Okay.
Walt, and then Dale.
I just wanted to make an observation to Russ that since public safety is looking to build a public safety broadband network, an issue of priority access needs to consider both networks, that what you wind up with is a schema that's consistent across two different networks, each of which has a priority scheme associated with it. So that in a recommendation, you really should consider including at least an analysis of a scheme that would embrace both networks as a construct.
That's a good point. So we'll-
And the strength of the resiliency of the ability to complete the call is strengthened by the fact that you have these alternatives. You have a private network and you have a public network, to use old analog terms. Dale.
I was just wondering if you could expand just a little bit on the disability access issue. And, for example, statistics on people's willingness to move from wireline to wireless, if that's significantly different among people who are disabled. And one of the issues that I think of course, is central office power is obviously a factor in some people's decisions. And I'm just curious if how much interaction maybe you've had with the people here at the commission on that issue, and how they might be impacted differentially by the shutdown of the traditional PSTN.
Another really good point. We have looked into this one. This is what we're putting on for the next 3 months in terms of a deeper dive. The real issue around that, at least initially, some of the discussion was that the competitive forces in the market would come in with solutions and answer most of that. But I think in terms of, there is some legacy type equipment that could be stranded that needs to be addressed as well. When you talk about central office powering, for instance, that's clearly one of those. And there are opportunities there for mediation devices even to maybe bridge that. But it's an area that we need to look into in this next phase.
Thank you.
Jesse was next, then Marvin, I'll go to you. Yeah.
No, Tom, I just want to make a comment. Greg raised some interest.
I was just responding, and Adam said we'd address that later, so I took my flag down. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. No, I want to just respond to Greg's comment. He raised a very important issue I think needs to be addressed. We tend to think about this concept of single numbers or single identities, but we tend to think about it only in terms of individuals. But we also tend to think about, at least some of the people that are working that issue tend to think about machines as well as locations as having identities, not just individuals. And that may be something that the group want to expand their thought process to include, right?
Marvin.
We've talked about the issue of faxes with respect to voice over IP, but obviously it's an issue for wireless as well.
Okay, any further? I'm sorry, Brian, I'm blind, right in front of me.
Not a problem. 2 points. First, on the Dale's comment on disability, may want to also look at the FCC has the Emergency Access Advisory Committee, which just completed a survey a few months ago, which went out and looked at that problem as what methods are used for communication today, and I think that would be very useful for the group to look at as they make recommendations. Also, with regard to the SMS as well, that's also a hot topic of debate and discussion among various industry groups, as well as the FCC's EAAC itself. There's various reports that have been put out. And just to make note that the issue is more than public and emergency services adopting it, it's also on originating network side and how those messages that ultimately would get routed to the proper emergency services agencies. So that in itself is a bigger task than mentioned. Thank you.
Well, I think we're teeing you up, Adam, for the next part here, right? Because all of these really good points. This must be why you said 2018, or if not even 2018, some date.
Yep.
That, because there are a lot of things like this that have to get worked through in the process, right?
Okay. Yep.
Over to you. Oh, here comes the clicker back.
Here comes the- All right, thank you. So let's see. Okay, so I'm not going to speed read. I think if I look at Evelyn Woods, it was for reading, not for speaking. Okay. We actually toiled over this, the definition for quite some time. And rather than ending up with what I'm going to call a succinct 2 to 3 liner of what sunsetting means, we actually thought it would be better to get a white paper together, which we have, okay? And that white paper makes a couple of key points, okay? I'm not going to go through all of the key points, but let me go through the ones that really stand out. I'd say the first one would start with a statement to say that, you know, for all practical purposes, because of its deep penetration, the PSTN became our national system of record. Okay? And I think it was Dave Tennenhouse who said, you know, once something becomes this pervasive, people tend to use it as a tool. Okay? And so we as a nation used it as a tool to achieve functional, economic, and social goals, essentially, and have built up a body of legislation, standards, common uses all around the PSTN. A wonder system, but it's something that allowed us to actually achieve national goals, and that's the important point, essentially. Okay? We put in mechanisms to make it sort of a feedback loop that plowed money back into it, and it became more universal. As it became more universal, it was in fact easier to achieve those goals. Okay, we now find ourselves in a world where other technologies have entered the marketplace. The use of the PSTN has gone down significantly. And I think the important concept to get across is there's a point at which the PSTN can no longer be that tool, okay, that in fact achieves those social, economic, or functional goals that we had as a nation. Okay? And if you look at the evidence from the marketplace, if you look at the number of people who are coming off of the PSTN, I believe the attrition rate is something between 5 and 7% a year, okay? You come to a point where maintaining this infrastructure becomes increasingly expensive, okay? And at the same time, it can't achieve the goals that we want for it. Okay? So when we say we want to sunset the PSTN, we are really talking about, I would say, three real issues. Okay? The first is create an orderly transition from the PSTN's role as a system of record, okay, for achieving national goals to something else. And number two, the identification of and a migration to alternative mechanisms to actually achieve those goals, which we think continue to be important to our society and to our economy. Okay? And when you look at this, what you find is the PSTN and the technology that's involved in it, if you make such a transition, may or may not continue to be offered as services. That's really up to the operators and you know, what they wish to do, essentially. Okay? So I think from the top level point of view, if I were to reiterate it, it's that pervasiveness of the PSTN, its ability to be used as a tool, the fact that we're now seeing major changes in the marketplace, multiple means of communications that are used by all of us, okay, and the fact that you're coming to a point where the PSTN can no longer, in fact, achieve what it was set out to achieve. Okay? When you look at this, you can think of an opportunity statement, because transitioning to new technologies offers a lot of possibilities for the future. So I think we said a few words on that. When we looked at what are we transitioning to, again, a fairly important thing to understand that the underlying means of communication delivery and the content can really be changed. They're no longer the tightly, vertically integrated system that we had in the PSTN. And as a consequence, there's a lot more that you can achieve with these new technologies, essentially. Okay? We said a little bit on history, a little bit on achieving national goals. I would come back to the next point, which is going beyond vertical integration. And, when you look at this, this is what has allowed us to have this tremendous flowering of all kinds of new services, all of which rely on a much more complicated fabric. It's very heterogeneous in nature. There are many means of communications. And if you now want to achieve things like universality, emergency response, things of that sort, they really have to be rethought at a fairly fundamental level, essentially. Okay? So if I were to give you a little summary, I'm going to start off with the last item. This isn't about tearing copper out of the ground or out of the wall, essentially. The technology can continue to live. But what is important is to identify a migration to alternative mechanisms for those things that are still important for us, okay? And really to move the PSTN out of its role as a system of record for achieving goals at this point. Okay? What we thought would be important for the group to do as the next step is, instead of sort of pulling a number out of the thin air, it's 2018 or something of that sort, is to really sort of take a look at a roadmap of what it would take to actually achieve the three things that we stated, okay? And if we look at it, there have already been a number of workshops. I think Wiley Ryan did a conference on sunsetting the PSTN. There was a presentation to the CSTB at the National Academy, and there are a number of other engagements that are sort of a public nature at this point. Okay, so I think if I were to look at it, our intent is to continue the work of the 7 subgroups, but the real culmination of this is to end up with a roadmap that says if you remove the PSTN as a system of record, what would take its place, okay? And what is an orderly way of going about doing it, essentially, okay? If you look at that, there are really sort of 2 timelines. The first timeline is what seems to be naturally happening in the marketplace. The second timeline is what would it take for our regulatory and legislative processes to do something that's sensible. So I think that's the summary from the group.
You all have really tackled a problem that is hard to get your hands around, and have begun to focus it down. And you and David and the whole group, I mean, what a significant undertaking this is. Are there any questions people want to bring up at this point in time, or comments? Dennis?
Just one on the roadmap. I think this is you summarized this very well and given a good overall view. But from an action statement standpoint, is this something that your work group would be able to achieve by the December meeting in the way that Tom opened the meeting with the definitive actionable items for each of the group?
So let me do the following thing. We actually, on the, I'd say spur of the moment, put together a roadmap, took roughly 2 hours to do, okay? And then we stepped back because obviously it wasn't thorough and didn't have the underpinnings, okay? I would actually say what we will probably produce as a result, okay, are the elements of a roadmap and the questions that have to be answered to construct a proper one, okay? Part of the orderly process is in fact to develop the informing material that tells you what a sensible roadmap is. And I don't think we're capable of that in the next 3 months essentially, okay?
So your work product is going to be an identification of the stops that the train has to make along the way, which would include, for instance, the kind of issues that Dale
Yeah.
brought up and others.
But actionable items that have to happen to actually
and-
meet that.
And do you intend in the process to have a discussion, if you will, about the significance of the movement from an analog world, a circuit switch world, to an IP world, and how do we educate
So
both policymakers and the public on
So
that?
I would actually say the educational component of this is probably one of the most worthwhile parts of the product.
Great. I think we agree. Yeah, Tom?
Tom, just to amplify that a little bit, and to give the bigger groups some insight into discussions we've had in the last week, which have, I think, been very fruitful, is that we realize that this is not a transition that's happening because we think it ought to happen. This is a transition which is happening whether we like it or not. And what we need to look at is that as the transition happens, what are the unintended, unplanned consequences, which ones need mitigation, and in fact, which are possible to mitigate. So part of making a timeline, we've realized, is making the null timeline, or the timeline of the null hypothesis, that is, without any intervention, but looking at the current market forces, what's happening to the PSTN, and what are the consequences of that for those things. As Adam said, we rely on the PSTN as a platform for many social goals, for many technical goals. If subscribership to the PSTN goes below certain levels, is the PSTN then achieving those goals anymore? Or is there going to be a goal gap? And we have to, when we look at the timeline for interventions that we might recommend, we have to be practical in realizing that this train has already left the station. It hasn't waited for us, and it isn't waiting for us. And if we're recommending interventions, they have to be timely with respect to where the train's going to be by the time the intervention can occur. So, we sort of known that in the back of our heads, but some people really helped us tease out the fact that I think is very important, particularly in our education, that our first statement that we should sunset the PSTN started somewhat of a backlash saying, how dare you sunset our PSTN? And I think an important point to make is, no, the sun is setting on the PSTN. What we're trying to do is make sure we're not left in the dark.
And to keep your railroad metaphor going, do you think we're heading that we could be heading towards a train wreck unless something is done about this?
Yeah, and I'm not absolutely, I don't want to be an alarmist. I think that we will, that sometimes there are some consequences that the marketplace will deal with well, and there are some consequences that the marketplace probably won't deal with well. And if we don't think through the implications, the chances are that we're going to look back in 5 years and say, gee, I wish we'd done something about that. And I think more likely than a train wreck, Tom, is some incredibly expensive intervention at the last moment because we didn't plan for it before, like keeping the PSTN up at an enormous expense for a relatively small but significant number of users who shouldn't be but are dependent on it.
Any other? Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark, and then Peter. Mark, and then Peter.
Okay. Well, his comment is a good one. There will, in your timeline, as you're looking at that 7%, you're saying of the wireless adoption going through, there quickly will become a time, and have you worked the numbers yet as to where we reached that point to where we're actually, it's no longer cost effective to run the PSTN, and that it's slowing down funds that, like groups and Verizon and other ones who have to support the PSTN, slowing down their broadband deployment applications because they have to support the PSTN when it gets to a number?
Tongue in cheek, that's where 2018 came from.
Okay, okay, good. So you've run those numbers, all right.
I
Now,
have a feeling it
and
was that.
and do you feel that there will be, just as in areas where that you'll see like cooperatives that will come into given regions where the telcos, say like Verizon or other groups, don't find it cost effective anymore, that like local cooperatives will jump in and that will change that extension date for areas of the country that just isn't cost effective to build out?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think one of the misconceptions is we're not saying that the wireline or twisted pairs are going to go away, but the regulated monopoly of twisted pairs will. So there very well may be cooperatives that want to keep operating, and they're perfectly willing to do so, and if they can afford the expense, then
So be it.
so be it.
I think this is actually what I don't need to really get in, but I think you guys need, not for so much for the people in this room, although you're seeing it even here a little bit, a crisper definition of what we mean by PSTN, because I can give you a bunch of different definitions and they're all wrong, right? It could be the phone number system. I mean, literally the phone number system. Well, it's not that because wireless uses phone numbers and that's a perfectly fine answer, right? It could be the thing I pay for that terminates in my house. Well, you know, if I take my phone over cable as an ancillary to my broadband service, we're probably okay with that. That's probably not the PSTN, but it could be. And the user might think he was still on the PSTN. So I think, in fact, what you really are talking about is the special regulatory structure that supports a particular wireline architecture that, you know, was the backbone of the country for the last 80 years. If that's what you mean, and if it's not,
I'd say it's that, and it's the orientation towards voice at the same time.
fair. But I mean, I think you got to get a crisper up front of that, or, you know, some of the questions even in this room kind of reflect different interpretations, and God, it gets out of this room, there's going to be all sorts of interpretations of it, probably not the ones that you really want.
We are in the public meetings.
Peter,
I know. but I meant-
that's a good point, Kevin. Peter.
Just as a follow-on to what Tom said, which I thought was excellent, there must be some break point that you could figure out before the December meeting, Adam, about where the subscriber, because fundamentally it's just like the post office, it's just like these municipalities that are dying because the taxpayer base is attriting. And the question is, at what point do we lose enough subscribers that we literally can't continue to support the PSTN without some form of tax on the existing subscribers, who then at some point will find it too expensive to participate? Because that break point becomes, I think, a really important, that's the canary in the mine that I think they missed with the post office and a lot of these municipalities missed, was there is a break point where literally you must subsidize every single user on the system to keep it running.
Right. We have to remember that we're, in some respects, and according to some people, we're already past that break point, that the subsidies that are being spent on USF today for PSTN are diverting money that should be spent on the broadband network that replaces it, and that in rural areas we're well past that point. We can't run, we never quite did get to the point where we could run the PSTN without a subsidy,
Yep,
but now there's
yep.
a rapid escalation in the per subscriber subsidy required, bankruptcies of companies like Fairpoint, the withdrawal of companies like AT&T and Verizon with a bigger base to socialize the cost from those rural areas. So you're absolutely right. We have to identify, I think it's a series of points actually where
Sure.
various things break, but we're going to have to recognize that some of those points are probably in the past.
Yeah, I think it'd just be helpful for us, particularly, I don't have the expertise in that particular area. It'd be very helpful for this group, I think, in December, just get some handle on what those metrics are at a basic level, because the train may be heading over the cliff faster than anyone even think. I don't know, but that to me is the canary in the mine.
Peter, if I recall the numbers correctly, because they were in Shahid's presentation last time around, we're down to somewhere in the low 40 million in terms of PSTN subscribers. I think at the peak, the number was over 200 million connections, essentially.
I think we need to be, I'm sorry to interrupt, need to be careful because PSTN's traditionally been in households.
So 130 million households.
Whereas
and we're down
wireless
to
tends to
45.
do end users.
Okay, let's go Charlotte, and then we'll work around this way because there's enough cards on end here. But Charlotte.
Yeah, I just had a comment and a question. From my perspective, it's not the large carriers that are having a discussion about PSTN in or out. I mean, we are dealing with some issues, but the bottom line is all the large carriers are moving to direct IP connections, with everybody, regardless of whether it's internal, how we use their services internally or externally. But what I see is, I used to work a lot with small local exchange companies, and that's where I get really worried about the small local exchange companies, and do they really understand which direction they want to go? I wondered whether or not you all thought about how you get the message out to, to smaller companies that may not be thinking about an IP connect.
Yeah.
Okay, tell you what, I'm going to break my own rule and go, John, on behalf of those.
On behalf of at least 500 and some odd small rural companies, the message is out there, loud and clear as to where we need to go and how we need to get there. It's the funding issues that we're all alluding to, and to your point, sir, it's what are you talking about? What are we shutting down? Are we shutting down, and I like to say, we're shutting down the switching hierarchy, the class 5, 4, 3, 2, et cetera, and we're reusing most of the rest of the infrastructure. So just to answer, at least the rural companies that I deal with on a daily basis, and they're probably the bulk of the, my inbox filled up tremendously when the 2018 date came up. Certainly understand that, and I'd like to go on record, Adam, if there's anything you need directly from the rural companies, please use me as a resource.
In fact, one of the next items we were looking at, okay, is in fact to get some real segmented data of who gets affected by this, how many subscribers they carry, how many people they employ, and in the least a rough cost estimate of what it takes to do this.
Do what?
To actually
replace
the switching systems, all of that with an IP-based system, okay?
Can I suggest, John, that one of the things you ought to do is raise your hand, go over and make Adam your new best friend and see if you can talk your way onto his work.
And by the way, we would be happy to take any input we can.
Okay.
Done.
Okay, coming around, Dennis. Oh, I'm sorry, Russ, didn't mean to.
Yeah, I think it was brought up earlier too. We have to be careful because if we move from a household to 4 individual phone numbers now, especially in rural areas, that's going to really break the Universal Service Fund probably if you're going to subsidize all those. One thing we are looking at when we propose the sunset of the PSTN, wireless is just one of those technologies. It could be a wireline broadband VoIP solution. It could be a number of other solutions. So let's not go off the deep end in assuming we're going to have, just one sort of technology choice. There's quite a few choices out there.
Dennis.
Just a real quick comment. I think that the earlier comments made around getting really crisp, primarily Kevin made, is really important. And then again, following up on Kevin, the firestorm is really already now. It's certainly for the rural telcos, but the conferences are all now homing in on this point. Out of the blue, I've been invited just because I happen to be on the TAC to present at a conference, which was quite startling to me. But I think that we've really got to be crisp very quickly, and I think we're going to need a position from the FCC itself fairly quickly on this one, which is going to be a challenge. Because right now this is a recommendation from the TAC, but it's not an official FCC, this is what we're going to go do. But this is spinning up really fast.
And how often does the TAC make news? But last time that Adam made his presentation here, we ended up in USA Today the next day.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's the point of the firestorm. So it's not future on that one either.
Jesse.
Thanks, Tom. Being a descendant of the Bell system, I'm sure Ditto Bell is probably rolling over listening to this conversation. But I think we need to think about the PSTN being much broader than the U.S., and it has certain international implications. So my question would be to Adam, have you guys looked at the international implications of what you're doing and what might be coming out of the U.S.?
Yeah, and so the answer is yes, because there are all kinds of international treaties and that we're a party to, okay? So the answer is yes, it's all tangled in that, and it's one of the set of issues that has to be dealt with.
Hilton.
Yes, and this has been discussed as well, but, you know, what we're doing is going from really TDM voice, which is what it was built around, to, you know, to IP multimedia. And so I guess someone made a comment down there too. The infrastructure of at least the wires to the home are still being able to leverage for DSL communications. Same way you have cable modems, same way you have fiber. All these technologies are enabling broadband. And so what we're seeing is, for the TDM part of this whole thing, you know, why continue to subsidize that? Why not take that and maybe it's a regulatory environment. What do we support moving forward? Maybe we support some of the rural operators to upgrade their systems to get closer to the home so they can provide DSL technology. It seems like that's the framework that we should be working around. And wireless is just one of those. And in fact, I didn't say wireless because we've been talking a lot about wireless. It's just one of the solutions available to provide IP connectivity to the home. So,
and that could fit with Kevin's definitional issue.
Yeah, that's why I think the
I mean,
definitional issue is really
TDM, if definition becomes as specific as a TDM kind of service, that's an interesting point. Okay, Dale. Then I'll come back.
By now, I had some reservations at the last meeting on this, and the discussion here, I think, has really helped me. I still get a little bit nervous when we say about deregulation. Well, we can deregulate voice, but that voice does ride on an infrastructure, and the market power, if there's market power, comes primarily from the ownership of the infrastructure, and that's including the wireless people too, who need it for backhaul. So I get nervous. I'm all for, in a sense, deregulating at the application level. I'm a little bit more nervous if you define the PSTN in some way that says we're going to deregulate down at the physical infrastructure level. And that goes to I don't want to open all the sore point, but you know, this is special access and so forth too. We've not really talked about those big trunks that go out and serve large businesses, which are riding a special access. That's a different part of the market, which goes back to the, you know, who you call. You call big businesses and you call them at a certain number, and that rides over a big pipe, and that may or may not be market power associated with that facility.
Do you think we need a computer inquiry as to how to parse those two?
That is a point I'd retire permanently.
Marvin, I'll come back to you.
Well, we are talking about moving to IP voice with wireless sometime in the 4G era. By 2018, I predict 50% of wireless voice is still going to be TDM. And so TDM means wireless too.
Okay. That's an interesting prediction. 50%. You don't think that it's going to, you don't think that the transition to IP is going to go that fast? 50% of users or 50% of traffic?
50% of traffic.
50% of
Well,
traffic?
50% of users.
Okay.
50% of users.
Okay, I'll come. Yeah, and exactly, and the traffic will be, but the traffic will be
50%. The voice users. I'm not saying
Okay.
data traffic is going to dominate the voice. Yes, but
Okay. No. He wants to talk about pornography. I mean, that's why.
Should liven it up.
No me and then David.
I'm not sure what's going on over there.
He wants to make sure we're on USA Today.
Yeah, this is the
I
New
did
York.
want to ask, is the reason Dick Lynch is not here because he threw the clicker? I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. I know he gave us a beautiful
There are
goodbye last time,
consequences
and
for
we'll miss him,
things,
right?
Naomi.
Just to build on Dale's point, I also wanted to make a comment that the PSTN, while it's no longer of the same doesn't have the same meaning in our as a universal infrastructure. It is still a critical one today, that it's helping with in most of our communications goals. And I think like one of those goals is facilities-based competition. I wanted to add like that to the goals of things like 911 and accessibility. And I think that like examples of some of those facilities-based competition goals are things like interconnection with the PSTN or local number portability. And I think those are some of the things that Dal was referencing, that could become quite expensive if we're, if we're not careful with how we, with how we transition them, because they're really vital to like enabling competition in the marketplace. So I just wanted to add those examples to what Dal was saying.
Good point. Okay, David, you have detented?
Yeah, I'll take it up with Marvin. I think just to say that a lot of those 3G wireless calls actually get converted to voice, so they're VoIP. So they're TDM on the outside, but they're not on the
VoIP
inside.
on the inside. Yeah. Okay, you're down. Everybody?
Get them over the air.
Jesse, you're going down. Marvin, are you up or down?
Well, I just want to respond to to Dave there and simply say, but that could be true with a lot of rural wireline companies too, that they're going to be TDM at the edge and then convert to VoIP to connect to the core.
Probably what it all.
Okay. Well, Adam, this is all you have to worry about between now and December. And so we look forward to your specific, actionable suggestions. But this is, I don't mean to make light of it, this is a hallmark of what's going on in this group and is going to help define things going forward. Okay, are there any other questions for Adam on critical transition, other than saluting him for in fact making it almost inside the time frame? What you didn't know is I actually in my schedule had planned it out to give you a little bit more. Okay, Charlotte, let's talk about IPv6.
Okay. I'm going to do a tag team with my colleague John Brzezowski, who's helped me a lot due to my disability this summer. So we're going to do a little bit of a tag team. Anyway, wanted to hit, if you could turn to the, I don't have the clicker though. Clicker.
Who has it?
Adam.
You can just throw it down.
Yeah, right.
Might be good.
Switch. You got a point there.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on our prior work and what we've been really focused on. And essentially, we cut it up into sectors, and one of the reasons is we really wanted to understand how the different sectors differed from others. And we've met with a number of sector proxies. We met with D-Link, which is a modem company, Silver Spring, which is basically a smart grid company. We met with Cisco, with their person who's driving their IPv6 program, Aaron, the Veterans Administration, Cable Labs, 6Net, OnStar, and then also Peggy Smedley from Connected World Magazine. And, one of the interesting things that Peggy Smedley said when we interviewed Peggy is she said that she was really impressed by the impact of IPv6 Day, that no one in the machine-to-machine arena really was discussing IPv6 except some of us technologists like Hilton, et cetera. And all of a sudden, on the last day of their conference in June, basically everybody was getting all excited about IPv6 because of the demand for machine-to-machine communications and the fact that they believe they're going to have challenges with address space. We also have proposed some development of benchmarks to gauge progress, and in fact, Walter will be putting on the website 2 documents, one called that deals with the benchmarks that are in draft form, and we'd love to get all of your input, and the second one, which is some TAC IPv6 concepts. One of the things that we've been really trying to do is also encourage collaboration between the government and industry, and looking at progress tracking, goal setting, and policy recommendations. Sorry. Like I said, we interacted with a number of industry groups. One of the reasons was to try to increase awareness of IPv6. And essentially, we're very happy that Brian Mark Walter from the CEA has established a working group that's going to kick off officially sometime later in October. We believe that every sector really needs to focus on an evolution strategy to ensure that they can support IPv6. We believe that any issues should be communicated to the government and industry. One of the people we interviewed actually was very concerned about the Wi-Fi industry, and felt that if we got Wi-Fi in the sandbox with us, we'd make a lot of progress in that particular sector. Lots of things been going on in evolving the benchmarking effort, and that's one of the reasons that, with the CEA forming the working group, they'll help provide more input based on their community of interest. And then, producing recommendations for IPv6 compliancy, focal point of IPv6 working group will be messaging and awareness, development of IPv6 profiles and guidelines, independent logo and testing programs. D-Link is actually talking with one of the carriers about putting a logo on there with the particular carrier's name to ensure that people know that the equipment is IPv6 compliant. And also they're looking at creating an environment where instead of having IPv6 capable, that it actually becomes the default in their modem. So first first goes for an IPv6 address, and if that's not found, IPv4. We believe that CEA is ahead, and that they can become a potential prototype for other sectors. And we also need to understand who are going to be the change agents. We believe that NANOG, ARIN, the CIO forums are all areas that need to be explored. So, John?
Thanks, Charlotte. So as part of the work that we've done, Charlotte made reference to this, we drafted some, we took 2 steps, and I think many of you heard the first part of what we had been after in the June meeting. We had proposed some high-level recommendations around what the benchmark, what we actually aimed to measure and benchmark. Subsequent to that, between the last meeting and now, we've prepared a document which outlines those particular benchmarks. It is in draft format. As Charlotte mentioned earlier, we absolutely are looking for additional feedback and comments on that. We recognize that it is a draft. We already have some comments in the queue that have to be addressed in part of the document. But again, the more eyes, the more comments, the more review that we get, the better. We've essentially taken a pass at some of the high-level sectors and key areas that we can use to identify the progress of V6 adoption. And of course, this spans a number of areas, not just address utilization or traffic patterns. Everything from consumer electronics adoption, service provider availability, and a number of things that you'll all find included as part of that document. And of course, the key here is not just what products have the potential to support it, or but actively being used is really the key here, right? After the day is done, we need to see the needle move. We've also, as part of our activities since the June timeframe, have been having discussions with the NTIA about some collaborative efforts on that front. So stay tuned as some of that work unfolds. And of course, as we make progress, as things evolve, so will the work that we're doing, right? We fully expect that the proposals we have on the table now, the information that we've documented, will change and be updated over time. So again, keep an eye out for that. And then ultimately, one of the key recommendations here is the kind of the formation of a bit of a committee to oversee some of this activity. This ultimately is key. When we establish some of these recommendations, we'd like to have a mechanism in place to go back and actually provide oversight there. Oh. Okay, I'm going the wrong way. Oh, gee, I'm confused. Okay, so just a little bit, next slide, slide 35. So so a little bit more around about the collaboration with the government between the TAC here and the NTIA. We're currently in a planning phase with a workshop specific to V6, and there are going to be three key areas that we hope to touch on as part of this workshop. The details, the agenda, the timing are still being vetted out, but again, as that information becomes available, we'll be certain to communicate that here to this crowd. First, lessons learned as a result of World IP6 Day. As Charlotte mentioned, I think it was Peggy had made reference to how impactful that was. As folks who are directly involved with some of the early planning, as well as the actual activity itself, we concur and can really say wholeheartedly that it was material impact. That there was material impact at World IP6 Day. Tangentially, I can say there's also the possibility of a World V6 Day Part 2. So as that information unfolds, you'll be the first to know it. And again, as part of the workshop with NTIA, there are policy issues, things like how to encourage the use of V6 and what happens if you do not. There is a very intense discussion around what happens if you do not deploy IP6 and what are your alternatives. Many folks really seem to believe that there are no it's BAU, when in fact it's not the case. There are a lot of companies out there that are actually talking about IPv4 address sharing, which represents a significant change to the internet ecosystem. And then ultimately, after the day is done, a key intersection between the NTIA workshop and the FCC TAC V6 working group is the topic of benchmarking. So we expect there to be a lot of interactivity on that front as it relates to working with the NTIA. So again, to reiterate our proposals from a TAC point of view, sector-based awareness and efforts, we found that through the pioneering with Brian Markwold from the CEA, and that being a really good a sensible model for us, we're proposing more of that as far as other industry sectors are concerned, and we are digging deep as far as benchmarking is concerned. And then ultimately making sure that if there are any policy issues that result, that we have a forum to discuss them and elaborate. Which one am I going? All right, is this me then? Okay. Okay, so slide 36. So some of the future work. So some of the topics, and I will not kind of be a broken record here. Of course, we'd like to continue down the path of the sector-based approach, and also start having discussions around the sunsetting of IP6. What does that mean? What's involved with that, and really what are some of the implications related to that? There are some. Yeah, this one here. Yeah. So one of the key topics there is the alignment of the broadband subsidies and grants with IP6 infrastructure deployment, and ultimately the capabilities. Right. This was. Oops. Yeah. This was a very interesting topic of discussion, and we certainly welcome some feedback and some comments on this topic in particular. And then really there's three other key areas. There's the marketing incentives, some of the stuff that we had talked about as far as seal of approval to help people differentiate products that are V6 capable versus not, and ultimately incentivizing consumers to buy products that really do work with V6. Ultimately, I think all of our hope is that there is no such thing as a product as V4 only in the not distant future, to help simplify the purchasing process. From an equipment and supplier point of view, again, to echo one of the points that we had earlier, to have V6 enabled by default. So you don't have to have a consumer wonder whether or not that's something they should turn on. This is something that we're striving for, or at least towards, and making sure that there's the technical guidance in place to support that. And then last but not least, some educational messaging around, creating awareness as it relates to the importance of V6, not only through, in the commercial sector, but also with consumers. The topic that, one of the key points that we discussed here was, how much do people want to know about IP6 compared to what they know about IP4? So again, certainly welcome some comments and feedback there.
Yeah, so if you turn to the next page on 37, we do believe that there's a couple of other ideas that we've been throwing around. One is really an awareness campaign, and we've been trying to do that in the sectors, and it's interesting, in a number of one of the largest retailers, someone went out to visit them to see if they actually had any IPv6 equipment available off the shelf. And this particular retailer, you could order it from their web page, but you couldn't get it on premise. And so, getting that, the retailers thinking about that, especially in the cable modem space, is extremely important. The second thing is we've also been thinking about what other industry groups are central to evolution issues. Basically CEA is definitely a key one because they have the relationships with all the retailers. Another one in our industry happens to be Cable Labs, where we've had about a 5-year plan working on IPv6. And we've been talking with Walter about a number of other industry groups that we may need to bring under the tent with us. Government acquisition and contracting should favor IPv6 services and technology. We were a little bit surprised when the We the People new website came out that it's not compliant with IPv6, and yet it's the way that we want to start communicating with the people of the U.S. And then, lastly, with the CEA, we're hoping that they'll really focus a lot of attention on working with the retailers to broaden the knowledge. Just like we went through DTV, if you have the people in the stores that can help explain it, you're going to be in a better position. So I'll open it up for any questions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, John.
John Chapin. Thank you. Since you have an awareness challenge in front of you, and also I'm remembering something Casey said at the last meeting about the fact that there's not much end user pull for this right now. What about a competition with a nice prize for like the best applications that require IPv6? If there were a killer app or at least some really good buzz around that, that would be a good way to solve some of those problems at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a good comment.
Yes.
Maybe we could do that as part of IPv6 next World Day.
Yeah, and announce it at the workshop this fall and have this new governing committee that you're talking about perhaps administer it.
Mm-hmm.
So John, this is John Brzezowski. So there are actually some that are out there today. Either the prize isn't big enough or they don't get enough publicity. But we've seen some good innovation come out of opportunities like that. Perhaps with the right messaging and right awareness campaign around that kind of program, that would really help.
Charlotte, at the last meeting I had raised an issue, and I just want to raise it again, that I think setting a date for sunset is an important item for this. Because I think as you start, and we talked a little bit earlier about these device identity, whether it's people, persons, or things, or even applications will have identities. And this whole issue of not enough IP addresses to allow the expansion of the application domain for new applications that can be directly addressable, which is a major issue for 4G LTE type networks that are going all IP, becomes a big deal for many of us. So I think a date where we will sunset IPv4 is a big deal, right? If you guys can stretch it to make that kind of statement similar to the 2018 date.
We had a lot of conversations over probably the last month and a half about not only a date for sunsetting IPv4, but what does IPv4 sunsetting mean? Right. And let me just, it's actually in one of the concept papers, but let me just make kind of what our thought process was, is that really IPv4 sunset date, could be something like, thou shalt not produce any equipment with only IPv4 capability after a certain date. Or, because we don't necessarily, it's not like you have to throw away the IPv4 addresses. Right. So it's not necessarily, like PSTN is a bit different because you're basically trying to eliminate, that type of equipment within your network. In this case, it would just be, we would really think about, you shouldn't have anything that isn't compliant with IPv6 and can support it, whether it be a website, whether it be a piece of gear, et cetera, et cetera. That wouldn't necessarily force anybody to take out only IPv4 boxes that they have within their network, but over time, we think actually as applications become more IPv6 centric, we're going to see people wanting to get those boxes out of their house.
Yeah, but first of all, thanks for the comment. The point I was really getting at last time, and maybe even here, is that there will be new emerging industries, and particularly in the area where we're pushing small cell networks, right, where we would creating networks on top of networks, right, that will need addressing capability. And if we have to go to only one source there's not enough addresses to
Right.
deal with it,
Right.
right? And that's an important thing that we ought to consider.
Right.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot, as Charlotte said last month. One of the, but there's policy issues here that are quite different from the PSTN. Whereas the PSTN is regulated, elements of it at least are regulated by the Commission and instantiated within the country. IPv6 is a global network, network of networks with global authorities regulating it. One of the things we wanted to do is start bringing up policy issues. So working with the NTIA, who was very cooperative in this area, they broadened the scope of this workshop we're talking about to focus not only on IPv6 Day, which was the original intent of the workshop, but to start talking about the policy issues associated with the transition as well as the tracking effort. So we hope to start a dialogue with industry and the relevant regulatory authorities to try to bring these concepts out. But we did a roundtable discussion. We got input from many different parties. It's colored a little bit differently than the PSTN discussion. So we're trying to develop the policy first.
Jack, we'll try and get your name tag right next time.
Yeah, just a quick question. It seems like, the IPv4 address exhaustion problem and the shortage is worse in other regions of the world than the U.S. We work with some of the operators in China, and it's becoming a serious problem over there. So I think that is certainly motivating them towards V6 deployment and usage a lot more quickly than what we're seeing in this country. Is there a killer app in the U.S. for V6?
Yeah. So one comment about some of the Asian part of the Asian region. I mean, you also have to understand, due to some political differences, the actual absence of V6 is not generally frowned upon in some cases, right? Because you have to understand that from their point of view, perhaps seeing everything is not a bad thing. From a killer app perspective, nothing comes to mind, and I've been doing this for a long time. Lately the killer app is the avoidance of IPv4 address sharing. Honestly, and that's a very genuine response, because most everybody you talk to today, they'll tell you that part of the reason that they've got on the ball with some of their V6 deployment activities is the concern around some of what Walter had mentioned, policy costs related to not doing V6, address sharing, and some of the side effects of that. They are significant, depending on how you look at it.
Russ, Mark, Jesse.
So I applaud you guys. I think you have one of the more difficult challenges, because it is a global challenge, as Walter pointed out. And in terms of the awareness campaign, do you have any specific targets? Is that down to the very end consumer, or what is your plan for doing an awareness campaign? And the other piece, I've got a couple comments here. There is some branding out there. I think IPv6 Forum has IPv6 ready type branding, which would be nice to have a little bit stronger, meaning IPv6 operating or something like that. And then in terms of, it would be good to be able to get a really good handle on this, and this may not be comfortable with some ISPs, but to actually look at what their IPv4 address, what they have in the vault, or so to speak, what they have, in terms of spare addresses out there, to get a real good handle in terms of when things will exhaust. And also, have you thought about putting this campaign or working with the ISPs to actually have them do the advertising to consumers, what IPv6 can do for consumers, actually have them put that on their websites or portals?
So I'll start with the branding one first. It's interesting because when we were talking to, some of the manufacturers of equipment, and you're right, there's a labeling out there, but it doesn't necessarily have the compliancy piece. So all it says is, okay, I swear to God, that sometime in the future I'll be able to be IPv6, or I can do IPv6, right? Versus basically saying that I am compliant. We do believe the default mode is probably a really good one, because then you don't have to train the consumers. And we need to, really, I think, as part of the CEA working group, that becomes really, really important in this area. and I do think that there has to be something from a consumer basis. And in fact, we did talk to one carrier that was really looking to put inserts in bills, making sure that people were aware of it, but we all know not everybody reads them. And many people have actually gone to paperless. So we got to figure out a better way to get the message across. But you can't just have somebody go, we got to get the message across that there is a problem. And that's got to be somewhere out there that's not based on contacting individual by individual, but some other better form to do that. And I don't know if anybody would ever tell you what their IPv4 space is and how, what the utilization is, because first of all, it changes.
Well, but not only that, but there are strict rules with ARIN and all your registries.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going to disclose it to you necessarily, but they, in order for them to continue to interact with their regional internet registry, there's certain guidelines that they have to operate under. So, if they cannot illustrate that, then that creates a difficult situation between them and the registry, which ultimately turns into a business problem.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the follow-up piece was, there's been quite a few press articles about how many connected devices there'll be, especially around machine-to-machine, 50 billion connected devices by 2018 or 2020. But I'm just curious if you guys have looked at when they'll actually, things will start to break possibly.
I think it's going to be very different by what industry you're in and who you are in that industry.
Right.
But I think what we heard loud and clear from Peggy Smedley and her contingent, and Hilton may want to actually comment about this too, because he also brought one person from his group to speak with us. But they believe that that now it's become more of a really, really significant issue as they continue to do things. What you were talking, if you talk to the smart grid people, Silver Spring up in Northern California, they currently have 5 million IP reachable devices that are that are basically doing all of the work that somebody used to do who read a power meter. They have 3 million in another country, and they're basically looking to go very, very deep all across the United States. So they believe they basically are putting all of their devices in IPv6 default mode. And one of their problems is they also have locations that they actually want to use Wi-Fi to connect to. And that was one of the challenges. So like the Wi-Fi industry, they don't seem to be, this is what we were told, they're not necessarily as interested in IPv6 as basically some of the smart grid manufacturers and the cable modem manufacturers, because people are seeing it as a bigger problem in certain areas than not. And I agree with you. I think the biggest issue is going to be in the machine-to-machine space.
And just to comment on that, and forgive my figures because I may not have them exact, there are about 5 billion people in the world, and I think probably about 40% actually connected over the cellular network. There are 50 billion machines out there. And a lot of those machines are physically monitored. People go out in trucks with rifles and look at oil wells. They actually jot down numbers from how much gas actually flowed from a well. Or we have people in bucket trucks going up to the top of poles to close reclosures. A lot of that technology is migrating to cellular M2M communications. And it's growing at a very rapid rate. I happen to be in that market segment, so I'm sort of benefiting from this. But we're going to run out of IP addresses. There's no way. We just talk about reading meters, right? From oil wells to monitoring gas pipelines, water pipelines to wastewater facilities to things that are remote. Cellular provides the most cost-effective way to actually monitor and control those assets. So this market is moving that way, and it's moving rapidly because we as an industry in M2M communications are investing basically to farm that this is the way we're going to communicate machines to machine moving forward. So this is a critical thing, and Peggy Smedley, who's who talked with our committee, she is sort of one of those in our industry. She has been leading our industry. She's the one that communicates for our industry, and she's looking at it like we are. And the way she described it at the last conference, when she looked out, she was looking at basically a group of deers in a headlight, right? Because they all know it's coming, They've gone from, from 2 to 3G to 4G evolution of their wireless network, the cellular network. And now this thing IPv6 is popping up as a major issue. And now they're wondering, what do we do? They just know they have to do something.
Okay, let's go Mark, and then Jesse, and then Bud, and then Brian.
All right, I got a couple comments. One was on the IP. You were talking about the IP at the ending time. Going through. Aaron has an actual countdown clock on their site of IP addresses. But one of the things that has changed in Aaron recently, some of the rules, is they've allowed end users or groups that own IP addresses to actually sell them without going back to the exchange. That has created sort of a what I believe will be a slowdown to IPv6 adoption, because some companies have been buying companies for large amounts of money because they needed IP space. So unfortunately now they see these IP4 addresses as an asset, a value, and them to move to IPv6 diminishes that value of the acquisitions that they've made. So now we've hit a new era where this clock is to move forward quicker before people believe that these assets they have and they start putting them on their stock statements that we own 12 million addresses and it's worth X number of billions of dollars. We're at that point now. The other one is the transition between legacy to from IPv4 to IPv6. Like you're saying, there's not going to be a turnoff. Right now, most of the IPv6 devices that are connected are running over an IPv4 world, and they're running over a tunnel over IPv4. They're running an IPv6 tunnel over it. What you're going to start seeing as the transition happens, you'll start see the backbones and the major parts of the internet going to native IPv6, and then IPv4 being tunneled over IPv6. And as that starts to happen, the IPv6 address, because the IPv4 address is going to be running over IPv6, will still get the benefits of the IPsec encryption, the other parts on it. It'll still exist, but it'll still have some of the security aspects. And then that way the IPv4 addresses can still survive in the world, get most of the benefits of v6, minus a few, and then they can just gradually migrate. It's just the equipment to be able to make the changeover for the legacy devices to be able to go from IPv6 to an IPv4 tunnel to support them. But that should work pretty well.
Yeah. So Mark, just a comment there, if I may. The one thing about the transfer of v4 address space, admittedly that has happened. There are some side effects to doing that, right? So once you do that as the recipient of the address space, there are some restrictions around whether or not you can go back to ARIN or not. So people who do that for a very they're highly informed when they make those kind of moves. There has also been some speculation that the economic situation, not necessarily the transfer of IPv4 addresses, has something to do with v4 address consumption. ARIN policies also had played into that. Maybe, Casey, if you had some thoughts there. And then the only other comment that I had about the use of tunnels, there's actually some studies out there that indicate that the use of tunneling is dropping down, native is increasing. I think the key here is making sure that the increase is growing, because particularly leading up to World v6 Day, we found that some of the tunneling technologies actually resulted in suboptimal IP6 connectivity. So a lot of vendors, people who build popular operating systems, have deprioritized the use of some of that tunneling technology.
Okay, Jesse, Bud, Brian, Casey.
I just wanted to comment on the statement that was made earlier when we were talking about sort of a mission-critical kind of application for IPv6. I think you're going to see a growth with the old IP 4G LTE networks in what we call micro LTE networks that are moving inside of enterprises that are driving machine-to-machine communication, as was stated earlier, is an important new area that I think will need a tremendous amount of IP addresses, and that today you cannot deploy those systems because we don't have enough IP addressing space in these private enterprises that want to run things like smart grids.
But
yeah, I have one question, but first, interesting point Mark brought up about people, there being a marketplace for IPv4 addresses, and because of the scarcity, people attributing value to them and starting to trade them. That's an interesting thought. Made me think, well, maybe it would have been interesting if IPv6 had only gone to 40 bits from 32 to 40 bits, because then there'd be an immediate scarcity of IPv6 addresses. People would be falling all over themselves to snap them up. But as is,
There you go, design flaw.
at this point, there's an infinite number, so yeah. My question was actually, in your benchmarking white paper on IPv6, you mentioned the 4 major browsers, and you had checked them off as to whether they were IPv6 compatible or supported IPv6. My question was, how did you figure that out? In other words, that gets to the issue of how do you figure out when something is IPv6 compliant or not, if you're going to do a logo program or something like that?
So Bud, it's basically testing and interaction with the vendor, right? I mean, with work like this, we don't want to make any assumptions. So through well-known, straightforward technical approaches, whether or not a browser can open up a socket to consume a web page over IPv6, right? That is the most fundamental definition of support for v6, right? So now there's a lot of variations in browsers, right? Safari, Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, they all do different things to optimize the experience. There's also changes going into most of those browsers to make sure that if there is suboptimal v6 at play, underneath, that it still does not adversely affect the user experience, right? So we can elaborate, and maybe this is something that we take offline, or if you wish, as a suggestion to add to the benchmarking, that we do that. But we basically keep track of the most fundamental, basically the minimum requirements level, right? We're happy to
I just
evolve
wanted
that.
to point out the compliance issue is not an easy one, because there are a lot of products on the market even today that are not IPv4 compliant. There was never a logo program for IPv4, and so
Sure.
it's interesting that CEA and others are looking at that, but it's not an easy problem.
Sounds like that's thrown to you. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks for that lead in. So I just want to back up and not drag it out too much, but the issue about communication and who we're communicating to, I think eventually it'll be to consumers, but we're not there yet. First, it's B2B to understand the problem and get people, especially in the CE industry, to make this a design requirement and raise awareness. So we got to refine that message first. You can't go to consumers need a crisp message and a call to action, and there's nothing to call them to at this point until we get the products and the retail channel ready. So we have a lot of groundwork, kind of working out from the experts towards consumers. We'll get there, but there's plenty to be done.
Casey?
Oh, where to start? Yeah, there's like 10 things floating in my head here. So first of all, Jesse, I just want to say we really took your charge seriously. We didn't blow it off. I can send you email where I said we can't not answer Jesse's question. The problem with sunsetting v4 is, in comparison to the PSTN example, which is what motivated us there, is it's almost the opposite dynamics of the industry. That is, the PSTN network is losing money and losing subscribers, and so it's quite incentive compatible with the industry itself, as well as with the vast majority of consumers, to get ahead of what's happening anyway and prepare for it. So I see, although it's quite sensationalistic, and I see why USA Today would eat it up to talk about sunsetting the phone network, it's really based in empirical reality of what's happening, the economic side and the technical side. V4 and V6 is kind of the opposite. All of the revenue is in V4. It's only a cost right now to deploy V6. There's basically zero revenue. In fact, we try to do economic modeling of the internet as one of our projects at CADA, and it's impossible to do economic-based modeling of V6 because the economics just aren't there. People who are deploying V6 now are doing it for reasons other than that they're going to see revenue in the short term from doing it. It's a pure cost. So that's one thing. And so, of course, the people that we mainly need to move to do that, the carriers, it's not in their best interest to do that right now. Although they recognize they need to do it at some point in the future, these things are vague beyond the horizon of their spreadsheets. And it's good to have the segments of the industry that do need V6 to happen, or else they are literally blocked. They literally cannot innovate. But I will also admit that I don't see anybody talking about a V6 only world. I see people talking about these dual stack coexistence things, which I totally acknowledge is very architecturally ugly and messy, and it's not clear to me really that it's going to work in the kind of applications that you imagine. So that's one problem with trying to imagine or discuss concretely a sunsetting of the V4 world, is that it's against the incentives of the people that you need to move. There's no economic force that's helping you along. And the end users, like on the PSTN side, the end users also, we all have cell phones, so nobody's totally freaking out when you really drill down and ask them what happens if your landline goes away. They want to make sure they have a 911 type thing. They want to make sure that Aunt Sally in rural area has something. But if you tell them they're going to take away their IPv4, they will mutiny, right? Because there is not an alternative right now to them. So I even asked on the conference call, and Hilton gave this great example. I said, do we have anything else in history that we can use as a model here? Because I'm getting nervous, because the data from a measurement perspective does not look good for V6. And he suggested, and for 15 seconds I had hope until he explained the history of it, analog to digital conversion of the cell phone industry. So again, an example where the whole industry had to move, but an example where you could see dollar signs on the other side of the bridge, a lot of dollar signs, entirely new industries, data applications, that you couldn't really do with analog. So the industry had an incentive, although maybe not moving immediately, had an incentive to move as rapidly as economics would allow. And again, we don't have that with V6.
You know what's maybe one is HD video. HD video.
How long did that take?
The way the business unfolded for HD video, there was no immediate revenue, to people like service providers, but a lot of costs, very, very heavy costs. So it's very interesting analogy, although the CE industry found a way to make it a revenue win for them, which is probably what drove the growth.
You had to wait for devices to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll stop there for now.
Great discussion.
Those are good points.
I just want to add one thing, and then we'll move on to Dennis. That you'll recall that at our first meeting, this was the number one issue everybody was talking about. Something's got to be done, something's got to be done, something's got to be done. Charlotte and John and the working group, working with Walter, go out, and the realities that they bump into are, one, that the internet is basically an unregulated space, and to the extent that there are any structures there through this multi-stakeholder process. Two, that inside the United States government, if there is any nexus of authority, it seems to reside at NTIA, and that this body here, the FCC, doesn't really have a statute it can point to say, oh, we can do something about IPv6, which makes what you've just heard all the more significant, and I think is a great example of leadership, because leadership is seeing an opportunity, seeing a void that hasn't been filled, and moving in to do something about it. And what this working group has done, and hats off to all of you and to you, Walter, what this working group has done is to identify things that they can do, even though this agency under which we reside has no real authority here, and to say, what can we do to talk about information? What can we do to talk about benchmarking? What can we do to talk about coordination within the industry? And let's go do it. And I think that's a great reason for a body such as this, and a great tribute to the kind of leadership that this working group has had. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Dennis, over to you on, do you feel like sharing today?
I always feel like sharing. I learned my lessons in the kindergarten playground.
The sandbox.
First, I will make the observation that, as has been the case with every one of our meetings, the slides are one level or two back from where the working group is. This shows the dynamic nature of our working group, that we're always moving forward. That's the positive side. The negative side, of course, is that had to give Chris the stick at the last minute, and he came through, and so what you should be seeing are the current versions of the document. First, a few of the obligatory charts to remind us what the sharing working group is all about. We're really all about sharing, but sharing both in spectrum, facilities, and then other approaches, and with the intent of creating jobs and creating economic development. Our set of initial views of where we should go are listed here. We have narrowed the focus, as we talked about last time, and we'll get down to an even more refined focus with this meeting. This is the group that have been involved, and it's been heavy engagement from the members of the team, and this was referenced in the remarks earlier that Tom led.
Whoops, I think you need the clicker because you're going on your, okay, there we go.
I have the clicker.
Okay,
I'm
you have
just
the clicker.
not
Okay.
clicking. Thank you.
You're punching your.
Yeah. I tend to do this. I've got to get integrated.
Jesse, will you help him, please?
I need to click for you.
Yeah, would you do that? So I do thank the group for the work, because it's been a very much a team effort. Now I've got the double clicking. So these were our initial 5 ideas. As of the last meeting, we converged the first 2, the spectrum efficiency metrics with the receiver standard, because we determined that receiver standards really were part of an overall systems efficiency metric, and that was an important learning for us. We have largely converged the third into that first topic as well with this meeting, the spectrum sharing taxonomy, because the taxonomy tends to integrate in a different way into the efficiency metrics, but more around the sharing techniques and the upper level view of this. We'll talk about then the small cell and the friction points as the other 2 key elements of focus for the group. So our idea 1 and 2 and integrating 3 through this meeting is to, in fact, look at how we achieve spectrum efficiency. What are the metrics? This is the technical efficiency that we're focused on. The bits per hertz per kilometer squared is highlighted here for personal networks, but equivalent metrics for a set of other items: broadcast, personal communications, point-to-point, radar, which we've taken a buy on for this meeting, though we're continuing to work on it, and satellite. The focus of this has ultimately been to create a white paper, and we did pass this out at the last session. That's been considerably enhanced. It has been sent out to you, albeit relatively recently. This has become a significant document now. It does draw on work done by others, particularly the CSMAC organization, but drawing from various organizations and building up a document that we believe will be very, very helpful. Again, we've integrated the receiver-related issues into this document and the efficiency related to that, drawing on the 20 years plus experience, particularly from Julie and secondarily from Dale, and integrating that into the document. And that, again, has made what we believe to be a very robust document. Our request for you is that you will read it, review it, and give us your input. The third major element of progress, though not of specifically our derivation, although there's a lot of engagement from the members of the TAC, has been the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Within the month, there was a meeting held to determine whether the PCAST organization should pick up the focus on spectrum efficiency and technology policies overall. And in fact, they've chosen to initiate a study in that area. Pursuant to this first point, the first statement of task for the organization is how should spectrum usage be defined and measured going forward. And it integrates in a range of activities that are meant to really look more deeply into the spectral usage environment and how can we take advantage of things like the study out of the TAC to propel the efforts in this area and maybe redefine our efforts in how we manage spectrum and how we achieve the very goals that we have for the TAC effort, how we achieve job creation and economic development and a richer capability for the citizenry of the United States. So that's a compliment to us, if you will, in that the PCAST organization President himself are engaged, and the Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer, both of the United States, are now focused in this area. We do believe that there is strong economic impact, and again, PCAST would second that position, so we need to add further flame to this fire. From a next step standpoint, we spent a lot of our time this morning talking about next steps, and not just what the steps were, but how we were going to achieve the steps and how we're going to achieve sustainability in the steps that we have before us and that we recommend for the whole group. The first item is an update over the charts that we'd sent in, and a critical one that I've already mentioned. We really are looking for your input as a Technology Advisory Council. We believe the document is at such a state where it will really profit from the input from the full body. So if you would gird yourself up, pick a rainy weekend and plan to spend a few hours on the document, we would be most appreciative of your investment of that time, and forward your input to me, and I will make sure that it's fanned out to the rest of the group. But that would be appreciated to the extreme. Second item on the document itself, our goal has been to ensure that this becomes a living document that is evergreen, that continues to be refined, because this is a very big topic. It's been talked about for years and years, but as we can pull things together, we believe that it has enormous value, and we would like to propagate that value forward. The conclusion of our working group was that this is a document that should be owned by the TAC on an ongoing basis. So this would be something that would live on, and this is part of why we would solicit your input, because we want your affirmation that this should be a living document, should be a legacy for the TAC, and a contribution that has continuing impact on the development in this area. We're looking to develop a crisp list of research topics that we can use to engage academia and the business research community to help to move this evergreen document forward. This will be one of the major report out items for the next TAC meeting, to get that crisp list of documents and to draw upon lists that have been created in other forums, as well as the work that we have within our own group. We do view that once vetted, that this living document should be a basis for recognition for those who would create improved systems in this area, so that this could be something that people are striving for and view and are in various ways incented to improve their products, because without the improvement of the products, it's nice to have metrics, but this needs to be something that it has incentives associated with it that would move things forward. Your ideas around the TAC on how to best do that would be appreciated here too. Clearly the Commission needs to be working with other organizations, and we have been drawing on those other organizations as well, most notably the NTIA and the CSMAC organization, and now the PCAST group. The third idea, again being integrated, is how do we look at the overall taxonomy of sharing? How do we really understand what has been shared in the past, how it's been shared? How do we look at improving the spectrum architecture for the PCAST view, to look at what usages of the spectrum should be associated with one another? We're all familiar now with the light squared issue, and if you have any particular interest in that, Julie will take his coat off and show you his back and the challenges that he is having in that area. But it's the most current illustration, and there are many in the white paper document, illustration of where two usages of the technology should not be adjacent to one another because of the effects that they have on the neighborhood. But there are ways that we can design the spectrum allocations so that we can avoid a lot of these issues, and that is a part of the subject of the work that John Chapin led in this case. But more fundamentally, how can we share? How are we sharing? How do we move forward to share better in the future is the notion of this one. And again, we have moved this forward by integrating it into the white paper to ease the ability to have the reviews by the rest of the TAC community. And we would very much solicit your input as part of this desire to have input. And we'd specifically like that input by the 28th of October. As you're going to see in the next section, idea 4, we will be holding a forum on the 28th, and we'd like to use the morning of that day to formally review the inputs that you all have provided to us in this area. There's a follow-on set of stages on this effort too that are probably beyond the scope of what we can do within the working group, but it is looking at these opportunities that I've described and moving them forward into a better structure for sharing, a better structure for how we allocate spectrum. Idea number 4 has been one that's probably had early on the highest amount of focus. This is the small cell deployment. This is a huge opportunity. This is one that is not unlike the PSTN development, where we've seen a lot of activity, femtocells, picocells, nanocells, Wi-Fi, offload, DAS, and the like, where the cellular system is being offloaded. There are other means of offloading data transfer that should be examined with care as ways of handling the overall spectrum limitations that we have. And we've examined that with some care at this point. The progress that we've had in the last 3 months has been continuing our work in reaching out to the various stakeholders in this area, and there are a lot of them. There are many people that are interested, many times with diverse views on their interest, but there is considerable interest and considerable opportunity here as well, but a great divergence in the view of how best to implement. The approach that we ultimately have come down to is establishing a forum to draw in a group, again on the 28th of October, to help us to refine our understanding of how to move forward with this. And I keep using this October 28th date, so it's burned into your minds, as you can see with the chart that's in front of you. But we're really looking to use this forum held in this room, starting, as you'll see in the next slide, in mid-morning on the 28th, to put the focus on all the stakeholders and to really refine our understanding and get all of this out on the table in front of the group. The forum is shown here, a welcome and keynote potentially from the FCC chairman, followed by 3 panels, one on the emerging technologies so that we better understand the technologies that are coming in addition to those that we already understand, a look at the business case, the opportunities and challenges that exist in this area, and then moving forward to how we establish this from a standards and public policy standpoint, attempt to then wrap it up with a half an hour of sorting out what we've heard and what we can learn and how we can move this forward. So that's the goal for the small cell forum. There is an immediate opportunity. Some of it's being taken advantage of as we see the rollout of various devices in this area. But how to get ahead of this one and to be more thoughtful and planful in the way we move in this small cell area is the key to this group. The 5th idea that we have is reducing the application friction points. The notion of this is that there are many opportunities for moving non-traditional applications onto, in particular, the commercial cellular arena, and this could include such things as the utilities, a variety of enterprise applications, even public safety, into using, at least in part, the commercial cellular environment as a means of satisfying their needs. Sharing is critical. This is a way to share. We believe the opportunity exists today. And in fact, we've come to understand through the course of the the last 3 months, that there is much more happening in this area than we might have thought. We've had interviews with 2 of the leading carriers, interviews with entrepreneurs and selected verticals to understand how they are moving forward in this area. And to our delight, we found that there's much more there than we might have imagined. It's not as easily accessible as it might be, and we've provided encouragement along that line. But there is a lot in place. So part of the task going forward is to communicate more effectively what is there already, and then to refine where the critical friction points are. Those friction points are such things as the fact that there are many carriers, and each carrier has its own program. If you qualify and are certified in one program, it does not necessarily help you to get qualified in the next program, and so some of this is challenging. There are the other pieces where non-carriers provide a lot of support for applications. Since I'm sitting next to Bud, who's sitting on his iPhone, the whole iTunes application space is clearly a part of that, and similarly the Google Marketplace and the like. So the integration of the carriers with the other sources of applications is important. Moving forward, our goal is to engage academia, more entrepreneurs, more verticals to better flesh this out, to produce a white paper. Since we've been so pleased with our initial efforts in producing white papers, we're looking to produce a white paper in this area, and we do think that it will be revealing and hopefully helpful in conveying what's already out there, and then convening a workshop in this area too to try to nail down what the final elements of friction are that should be overcome to make this a rich and fruitful area. So the final chart is our summary. We really, it's been noted, we've met a number of times as the other groups have. We believe that we're making good progress. We're looking forward to the 28th as a key point when we would have a lot pulled together from the white paper reviews, from the preparation for the forum, and we are really truly anxious to see our actions come to a 5-point succinct set of recommendations that we can provide in December.
Excellent.
So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
David, are you up or down? You're down, okay? All right. Thank you, Dennis. I mean, you've been making some significant strides in this whole exercise. We do commend to everybody, particularly those of you with some specific on-point expertise, the white paper and the ability to get back. It's now on the website. Is that right?
It will be by tomorrow.
By tomorrow, it'll be on the website if you don't have your own hard copy that you're taking back with you.
Well, and it was sent out. Chris also sent it
Right.
out to everyone, so it should be in your email. So you have
ample opportunities. That inability to access the document should not be an acceptable excuse.
Well
Brian.
said.
Dennis, they have me yet. So I haven't read the white paper yet, but I will, and I think you guys are doing great work, especially on the taxonomy, because I think we need to do this a different way to get there than what we've been doing. Has the thinking changed from, because we talked about receiver standards either a meeting or two ago, it's not clear to me that you can ever get there, that the government can be prescient enough to know what to say about how receivers should be built. You can say how spectrum will be allocated, including next to each other. I just don't understand. Let's say hypothetically there was like a satellite-based location system, and you wanted to put something next to it. How would you have known?
This is a hypothetical we're talking about, just a crazy idea, right?
How would you have known 10 years ago what to specify for one set of receivers that might possibly increase their cost or increase their location time, how long they take to function or whatever? Are you shifting away from that? Because it does seem like you could say, all right, this band is for this, and next to it we want to put stuff this close together, and so band A, you better figure out how to work with that. But to say Band A, you know, your receivers need to be a certain linearity or whatever, or selectivity, kind of, where are you in your overall reasoning on those issues?
No, we're actually working both sides of that. We have not given up on the first notion, and that's the efficiency side of things. Now move to both transmitter and receiver, so that we are looking to put in place guidelines, not standards, not, you know, things that FCC is going to beat you over the head with, but a set of guidelines that would encourage the improved development for receivers, for transmitters, because in this case, you do want to make the receivers better. I won't go to all of the technical definitions of better, but you want the receivers to be better. You want the transmitters to be better. You want to ensure that you are using your piece of the allocated spectrum as efficiently as you can, not just for your own purposes, but for those that are your neighbors as well. And in the white paper, we get into that to a fair degree. But we also recognize that we can do better in more planfully organizing what we put next to each other. That's given where we are with all of the history, it's a hard thing to go back and retrofit, but we can at least have some guidelines that help us and help the FCC in its deliberations.
Dan.
So I was going to hark back to something Dennis mentioned. As he said, several of us were at this PCAST meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there was an interesting theme that emerged from it that's actually relevant to this. I think it's really hard, in fact, I'd argue it's impossible for us to anticipate the unexpected, sort of by definition, and that's kind of what we look back and say, boy, we wish we had we knew what we know now. I think one of the interesting comments that was made there that might be a principle to think about going forward is most of our history we've worked to avoid interference, and we probably have to accept that interference is the norm going forward and design for that actuality. And that's fundamentally a different mind shift about how we think about sharing, and I just throw that out as something to think about.
Well, the fascinating thing about that, as you know, because this was my pitch at PCAST, the fascinating thing about that is the similarity between that which you just raised and the discussion that Adam was leading on the demise of the PSTN. Because the PSTN is a dedicated circuit, by God, we're going to protect it at all costs kind of a way of looking at communications in a world which has gone to chaos,
Organized chaos.
Organized chaos, and that there's, and if you take and move from analog concepts of spectrum that are all about, by God, you're not going to interfere, to IP-based examples where you're saying our job is to coexist. And the classic example, of course, is you go to Starbucks, and there is chaos in there in your wireless Wi-Fi connection. You go out on the street, and you have this well-ordered, licensed, thou shalt not interfere kind of a situation, and the consumer's unaware of what's happening. And how do we take those kinds of ideas and move them over into policy going forward? Walter is now going to rebut.
I'd like to build on something Dan said, in that I think at any given point in time, we try to make the most appropriate, most valuable allocation of spectrum for the applications as we know them. But I remember that when I came into the industry, satellite communications was assumed to have a much more significant role in communications than it's turned out in hindsight to play. I actually did the first intercity analysis of fiber optic economics. I was at AT&T at the time. And I can tell you that the day that we did that, normally when we introduce a new technology, you see a balance point. And the first day we ran this study, which was fairly complex, it came up showing an entire fiber optic nation. There was no, at that time, the big gorilla was something called single sideband radio. There were no radio systems left. And we spent a good part of the day figuring out what we did wrong because we didn't understand that we just wiped out an entire spectrum of technology. And whatever we do in the future has to be based on the premise that there's a good chance we're wrong right now in terms of maybe we're right in the near term, but things will happen in the long term. And this binding of spectrum to historical allocations and then trying to refix the problem is a very onerous problem. So there has to be some economic component too that says, are we making the best economic decisions supporting the best technical decisions?
Yeah, you said better what I was trying to say. It's hard to predict the future, and we should accept that fact.
You gave me a good run at it.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything to the bud?
Well, it seems like one of the challenges for the FCC here is that the whole idea of spectrum allocation is sort of built for a world of collision avoidance. In other words, the last thing you want to have is two people transmitting on top of one another. And so you allocate spectrum and you spec receivers and things like that to avoid that. But, you know, in today's world, systems are designed and networks are designed to assume collision, to assume interference, as Daniel said, and then to detect that and deal with it. And so you've got this whole history of collision avoidance on the spectrum, and sort of all of the stuff that has to do with assume you're going to collide and deal with that gets taken off the table as far as what the FCC can do. Even to the point where, I mean, you could even make the claim that this whole IPv6 versus IPv4 issue is a sharing issue. With IPv4, you can only share among 4 billion endpoints, and that's a problem. And so you go to IPv6 to increase your ability to share the available network, the available spectrum. But that's, as you mentioned, sort of historically off the table, because it's that sort of resolution for an address endpoint or for collision detection and dealing with is at a higher level in the protocol and not at the physical level of assigning a certain set of frequencies to an entity. So I just point, it's a problem that I think the various groups are dealing with and the FCC is dealing with, but it's worth, I like the idea that we should assume there's going to be interference from here on out rather than always trying to avoid it.
And I think you also just put your finger on maybe one of the issues, and we can tee this up and provide your feedback over the interim between now and the next meeting. But we had a discussion about this in Adam and David's group. Really what we're discussing in PSTN and what we're discussing in Spectrum is the same, and that is that we are stuck in an analog construct in an environment that is now IP, and where the basic underlying, by God, you can take these to the bank, it's religion kinds of concepts no longer apply. And we have a policy structure that the people in this building have to live under that is based on technological concepts from half a century ago or longer. And we're living on the cusp, and this agency is living on the cusp. And maybe one of the things that this group can help provide some insights into is how do we move through the cusp for this agency, for the economy, society, etc. David, and then Dale.
I'd just like to build on that and say I think that the sort of analog history of the technology that we used for communications for many years led us to, just to go a step further, it's not just about being analog, it led us to a vertically integrated set of architectures. Right. Where the content, you know, the carriage was analog of the carriage of the information, and we bound the sort of content and the services and the regulation and the whole stack that way. And that left us in a situation where even where we moved the carriage, the underlying transmission, to being digital, we've stayed vertically integrated.
Yep.
And I think that's perhaps the place where the commission needs to make the shift in a wide set of areas. In almost all these areas, the underlying technology's gone digital already. So that happened, but what unfortunately didn't happen was the decoupling. So in the PSTN document, you'll notice we talk about that decoupling, that going forward, you really have to think about the two layers and how they'll work together. I think you have a similar thing in the spectrum situation. I haven't had a chance to see the latest rev of the white paper, but I'm sure it's there knowing the people that did it. So I think it's this decoupling that we've got to sort through. And really get that decoupling well understood.
Great point. Great point. Dale.
Well, I just can't help myself here but say that regardless of whether your image is an analog world or a digital world, it seems just so clear to me that we're going to have to improve receiver performance regardless of that choice. I mean, that when I look 10 years out and this tremendous growth that we've got, we have to have, it just seems to be imperative that we have to have improved receivers. It depends on that, you want that, but it's fundamentally under that front end performance of the receiver is going to be critical. And whether we get to it through some sort of an affirmative action by the commission to do something with some sort of standards, or we sort of just tell everybody what the environment is going to be, and you must be prepared to live in that environment. My trouble is if you don't have some sort of an affirmative obligation, what we see is a proliferation of consumer devices where we have a de facto reallocation because there's so many of these devices out there that have been built without an affirmative sort of regulatory requirement that then you say, well, guys, there's so many of them out there, we can't reallocate, even though the country may desperately need spectrum at that point in time.
I mean, that's a great topic to flag for the next generation, Dale, because there is a regulatory nexus that is extant there today, right?
Yes.
Tom.
Yeah, I think almost lost in an exchange between you and Dennis is a key point. You said that we've gone from an ordered to a chaotic environment. Dennis said ordered chaos, but what's important is it's self-ordered chaos. It's not ordered chaos from the top down, and that's a huge distinction. And it works because it's self-ordered. If there were a traffic cop, it wouldn't work. What enabled that, and I don't think this is an academic point, obviously is faster and cheaper processing and more ability to distinguish signal from noise and to do the adaptive things. What enables the next generation, I think, is software-defined radios so that we're not building special hardware around special applications on special frequencies. Again, very analogous to the PSTN. So with all due respect, I don't think we ever want to do a cost benefit of this kind of traffic should have this much spectrum again, any more than we say on an internet tube, to quote Senator
Stevens,
that this much of this type of content should be allowed and that much of that type of content should be allowed. But instead we let the content contend for the space, and that's very uncomfortable if you come from an ordered regulatory background. And it's not a criticism of the world the way it used to be, but it's an opportunity in the world the way it's becoming if we can step back and just establish the principles of self-organization but not try to be the organizers.
Okay, so we're not going to solve this problem sitting here today, but this is the kind of thing that there's enough horsepower around this table to come up with some interesting concepts that we ought to be discussing at the December meeting, and that we will tee up if you'll get them to me. But I mean this is intellectually stimulating stuff. Who I saw somebody was up. Oh, Dennis.
Yeah, I just, Tom's point resonates well with me mostly, but there are some constraints around spectrum, physical physics kind of constraints that you can sort of overcome with the internet. So the parallels, even as you pointed out, the parallel in the flaw in the conversation that Tom and I had, there's a flaw here as well in that there are raw physics limits that we do have to build in. I sometimes fight with myself within my mind about this, but that underlying difficulty with finite amount of spectrum, finite capabilities that exist, costs associated with building things that are of a greater capability is the key element that has to be built into this whole conversation.
But there is a delta today between the reality inside the allocation and the limits of the laws of
absolutely
physics.
Huge.
And so
we have not
so the
added,
game becomes how do you play? You know, nobody's changing the laws of physics, but how do you play inside that kind of a delta? And how do you use the new digital?
and how do you,
kinds of
and as most people on the table know, I'm a great advocate of cognitive radio and dynamic spectrum access and the like. But the bounding of all of this is the tricky part. Where do we put the structure in to provide the constraints so that there aren't bad players? The difficulty is that you can construct cases where a malicious player can do some very terrible things if they're not properly brought into bounds, even as we have, in some cases, bad players in the internet.
Jesse and John.
I just want to make a comment, Tom, that I agree with a lot of the comments that were just made, but if you look at those individuals or those companies or entities that are playing in the small cell space, we assume that there is interference, and that's the value of cognitive radio, self-organizing networks. So we start out with that's the foundation of the technology that we're using to build these small cell networks. So there is some hope that the new people that are doing this are starting to look at the problem slightly different.
Point well taken. John.
Yes, the limits that Dennis is talking about are very real, but they move with time. And that's a very interesting point, that as the technology improves, as we get more tunable front ends that are power efficient and better filters that are tunable across a wide range. So I think it behooves this committee to look forward a bit beyond the current limits, recognizing that there will be limits at some point in time, and ask how you might transition over time to a new spectrum management approach that, gradually and with protection of existing systems and rights, so that we can take advantage of the new flexibility and capabilities afforded by the new technology, instead of making it fit into a very old management model. And I think the FCC's already started down that direction, but maybe we can offer some help and insights.
Yes, and Hilton.
So I just want to commend the team because, at least you guys took a look at alternative ways to address this issue with your IP base stations, picocells, micro base stations, even femto, as well as distributed antenna systems. Because in the near term, when you talk about job creation, things that can be done, 50% of calls are generated inside of a building. So anything we can do to get that information and off of the macro network to free that up and bring that over broadband pipes that are already going to enterprise or already going to the home, the better and more efficient we can use what we already have. So just want to commend you guys. I think we need to push that because there's other ways. I mean, Wi-Fi is another, when you're in building, definitely a technology that I have an iPhone that sort of switches when I come in. But in the near term, what can we do to sort of get that going? Because that is a job creation opportunity with technologies that are already there that can address near-term issue, getting back to what we heard at lunch today. And I think we need to push that a little bit harder.
Great point. Okay, so the challenge, so I mean, this is a fascinating discussion. We could all sit here and dance on this forever because it's truly interesting. The challenge that we have as a body is how do we turn it into something that relates to what the folks in this building do? And again, that's what I challenge you all respectfully to do between now and December. And let's tee up some of those issues in December. But I got to hear from you. Just about. I'm now pleading. Okay, this is there has been some really interesting discussion here, and there are people around the table that have some terrific ideas that we ought to incorporate. And I'm asking that you send them to me, and I'll get them as a part of the agenda that we talk about in December. Yes.
Might I suggest that if what you encourage is a many to one set of males, I fear you will get a limited number, because one of the things that tends to stimulate ideas.
That's a great point, Kevin.
Ideas. So, to the extent possible, I'd suggest that those kinds of ideas circulate on the list, which will tend to cause other people to go, yeah, but,
So I tell you what, Chris, let's start out. We'll do. I'll send it out. And give me the list, and I'll send out a list saying, "Hey, folks, remember, start the discussion, and let's."
Yeah, I just think it might generate.
It's a great point, Kevin. Yeah, we do believe in this distributed concept, right? Okay, Dennis.
We also have a
controlled chaos.
Controlled chaos. Yes,
we
that's
also
right.
have a history in this area that Kevin's been a part of, where these do generate. You may have more males than you ever imagined.
Okay, David.
Well, yeah, I mean, the concern I have here is that for this, what you guys keep referring to as chaos, we have sort of some really solid theory to control the signal to noise. I'm not sure we have anything like that for the tech.
Yeah, we do. It's called the delete button. Okay, is there anything else that ought to come to this group? We're going to get you out a half hour ahead of time. Thank you. I'm getting a signal for? No, we're not going to. The other group's going to come back in the December meeting. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Great discussion. Thanks to the work groups. A lot of stuff to do for next meeting. Thank you very much.